Today, we're diving into a story that honestly feels like it's straight out of a disaster movie, but it was all too real. We're talking about Fukushima. This is the story of what happens when the full, raw power of nature collides with our most complex technology, and technology loses. Everything changed at this exact moment. Friday, March 11th, 2011, at 2:46 in the afternoon. You know, for most people, it was just a normal Friday. But for millions of people in eastern Japan, this was the second their world turned completely upside down. So what kicked it all off? An earthquake. But this wasn't just any earthquake. We're talking about a magnitude 9.1 monster. That's the fourth most powerful ever recorded anywhere on the planet. For 6 solid minutes, the ground just did not stop shaking. It was, without a doubt, the biggest quake Japan had ever seen. And as absolutely massive as that earthquake was, it was really just the beginning. See, it was the first domino in a terrible chain reaction, a sequence of events that was about to push Japan's incredible engineering and technology to its absolute breaking point, and then way past it. Okay, so the quake hits, but the real knockout punch, that came from the ocean. You have to try and wrap your head around this. The earthquake triggered a tsunami on a scale that is just hard to comprehend. We're not talking about a big wave. This was a wall of water, literally moving as fast as a jet plane. And there was absolutely nothing that could stand in its way. Just how big are we talking? Well, at its peak, the wave was 40.5 meters high. That is over 130 feet. Seriously, next time you're outside, look up at a 13-story building. Now imagine that entire building is a solid wall of water hurtling towards you. It's almost unthinkable. And here is the truly tragic part. The plant's operator, a company called TEPCO, had actually issued a report just 4 days earlier saying that a 10-meter wave was a possibility. But the seawall they built to protect this critical nuclear plant, it was only 5.7 meters high. Not even close. They were about to face a wave nearly 3 times taller than their only line of defense. So right there, that's it. That's the point of no return. The moment Mother Nature just completely overwhelmed everything humanity had built, triggering a catastrophe inside the Fukushima Daiichi power plants. You know, for the first hour, it almost looked like they were going to be okay. The earthquake hits, and boom, the reactors automatically shut down, just like they're supposed to. A minute later, the backup diesel generators fire up perfectly. A first, smaller wave even hits the coast, and the seawall does its job. For a moment there, you can just imagine the engineers breathing a tiny sigh of relief. But then, at 3:35 p.m., the real wave came. Okay, to really get what happens next, we need to talk about something called decay heat. It's a really simple but absolutely critical concept. Think about an electric stovetop. You turn it off, but that coil stays glowing red hot for ages, right? Well, a nuclear reactor core is like that, but on a terrifyingly massive scale. Even after it's shut down, it produces so much heat that if you don't constantly cool it, it will literally melt itself from the inside out. And the solution, in theory, is pretty straightforward. All you need is a constant supply of power. That power runs pumps, the pumps circulate water through the core, and the water carries away all that dangerous heat. Simple. As long as the pumps are running, everything stays stable. Well, here was the fatal flaw. That giant tsunami didn't just crash over the seawall. It flooded the entire plant site, and crucially, it poured down into the underground basements, which is exactly where they had placed the essential backup generators, the last line of defense. And just like that, total blackout. The earthquake had knocked out the main power grid. Now the tsunami had drowned the backups. They had nothing. The plant was completely in the dark, and the countdown to a meltdown had officially begun. So this is where the story shifts. It stops being just about machines and technology, and it becomes a story about people. With every single system failing, the fate of the entire region rested on the shoulders of the workers inside that plant, who were about to face some truly impossible choices. So, no power means no pumps. No pumps means no cooling water. And without that constant flow of water, the incredible heat from the core just started boiling away what was left inside. By that evening, the water level in Reactor 1 had dropped so far that the nuclear fuel rods were completely exposed. And almost immediately, they began to melt under their own intense heat. This led to an absolutely terrible dilemma. As the water boiled away, steam pressure inside the reactor was building up to explosive levels. They had 2 horrible options. Option A, Vent the steam. This would relieve the pressure, but it would also mean deliberately releasing radioactive material into the atmosphere. Option B, do nothing and wait for the pressure to get so high that the entire steel containment vessel just explodes, which would release a truly catastrophic amount of radiation. What on earth do you do? They had to pick the lesser of two evils, so they chose to vent. But remember, there's no power. They couldn't just press a button from the safety of the control room. No, this meant that workers had to gear up and go into the reactor building, into areas with lethal levels of radiation, to try and crank these massive valves open by hand. But in a cruel twist of fate, in trying to solve the pressure problem, they accidentally created a brand new one, an explosive one. Venting that steam kicked off a chemical reaction that was about to create those devastating images we all remember from the news. So here's the simple science. The metal covering the fuel rods got incredibly hot. We're talking thousands of degrees. And at that temperature, when it touched the steam, it basically ripped the oxygen atoms right out of the water molecules. And when you take the oxygen out of H2O, well, you're left with H2, pure hydrogen gas. And hydrogen is extremely explosive. This hydrogen gas started pouring out of the reactor and filling up the larger reactor building. It was basically a giant bomb just waiting to go off. All it needed was a spark. And a little over 24 hours after the earthquake, it found one. And boom. At 3:36 in the afternoon on Saturday, the hydrogen ignited. A massive explosion just tore the roof and the walls right off the Reactor 1 building. The whole world was watching now. The disaster had just escalated in a very, very visible way. And things just kept getting worse. That night, the plant chief, a man named Masao Yoshida, made a now famous decision. He actually defied direct orders from his bosses and started pumping seawater into the core. It was a desperate last-ditch effort that he knew would destroy the reactor forever, but it was the only thing he could think of to cool it down. It wasn't enough. 2 days later, Reactor 3 exploded. Then Reactor 2 was in deep trouble. It was a complete, terrifying cascade of failure. Eventually, the explosions stopped. The immediate, chaotic part of the crisis was over. But the consequences of what happened in those first few days, well, those are going to be felt for decades, maybe even centuries. And that's the real legacy of Fukushima. So what did that aftermath look like? Well, a huge 20-kilometer evacuation zone was created. Over 228,000 people had to just pack up and leave their homes, many of them for good. Entire towns became ghost towns overnight, and a lot of that area is still uninhabitable today. But here's something you might not know. The official number of deaths directly from the radiation itself is 1, just one person. The real human cost wasn't radiation sickness, it was the trauma of losing absolutely everything. In the end, when you look back, the one thing that prevented an even worse catastrophe, and we're talking about something that could have contaminated Tokyo itself, it wasn't some miracle of technology. It was the people, the workers on the ground who stayed behind. They faced this invisible, lethal enemy, knowing the risks, and they fought to contain a disaster that was completely out of control. There's this quote that just says it all. Like the musicians on the sinking Titanic, the workers at Fukushima played their role to the very end. A truly sobering thought.